Welcome to this month's Fireside Chat on accelerating growth through a go-to-market strategy. My name is Samantha Lego. I'm Foresight's marketing director, and as the title suggests, this is why I've been asked to moderate today's session. And so I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. It's with gratitude and respect that we acknowledge the lands on which Foresight operates, which are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And for myself here in Vancouver, I want to humbly acknowledge the lands upon which we gather and work are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And so today's session, we've got a bit of an agenda for you, but scaling clean tech can be a challenge, which is why we've called in the team who's done it before to walk you through how an integrated go-to-market strategy was key to driving awareness and then converting that awareness to sales. I'll introduce our panelists in just a moment after some housekeeping. So the majority of this session is a moderated Q&A. Thank you for those who have submitted your questions before the session. At any time over the next hour, please use the Q&A option to post your questions throughout the presentation, and I'll field them along the way or towards the end. This session is being recorded, and you will receive the recording in the next few days, I would say. And just before we dive in, I wanted to say a few words about Foresight. So Foresight is Canada's clean tech accelerator. Our audacious goal is that Canada will be the first G7 country to reach net zero by accelerating clean tech innovation and driving the adoption of climate solutions. Since inception, we have supported 1,000+ ventures and collaborated with over 2,000 stakeholders, rights holders, and partners through domestic and international engagement. We've made great progress over our decade of impact, but it's thanks to organizations like you that we're here having these conversations today. As an event attendee, your feedback is important in shaping the topics we cover and the education we provide. Let us know if you find this session useful and share what you want to see going forward. We very much appreciate your input. All right, and so you've likely heard the saying, if you build it, they will come. And of course, I am referencing the misquote from the 1989 Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams. That's now been embedded into pop culture. But this is clean tech, not a baseball diamond. And sorry to squash your dreams to all of you tuning in, but if you build it, it is very unlikely that they will not just come. Not unless, that is, you have a go-to-market plan led by the types of people I am about to introduce you to. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists today, making up two sides of the team that enabled CarbonCure Technologies to 10x its growth. If you haven't heard of them before, CarbonCure manufactures technology that introduces recycled CO2 into fresh concrete to reduce its carbon footprint without compromising performance. Now, as clean tech companies in various stages, you know how hard it is to scale, which is where we're going to start here today. I'd like to ask a poll and just get a feel of the audience and where you're at in your journey today. So what stage of commercialization best applies to you? And your answers are pre-commercialization or commercialization. And we'll give everybody a minute to submit their results. All right, if everybody has answered, can we see the results? We're at a pretty even split. All right, so we got 48% for pre-commercialization and 52% for commercialization. So that's very helpful. Thanks so much. Okay. So today we have brought Lori Aizer, the former Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications, as well as Sean Zuberbier, the former Senior Vice President of Global Sales, Services, and Customer Operations of CarbonCure, to walk us through how they gain market traction to achieve the types of results that would not only fill one of Kevin Costner's baseball diamonds, but many of them. I'll let the duo introduce themselves, and then we can jump into their case study. Lori, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Samantha. That was an excellent intro. Appreciate that. So my name is Lori Aizer. As Samantha mentioned, I was CMO at CarbonCure. I have a kind of lengthy background in non-climate technology. I was in the SaaS business for many years in software, with a background really focused on marketing for demand gen. So I think there's a lot of kind of misnomers and lack of clarity around what marketing actually does for technology companies. The kind of flavor of background that I bring to the table is more around demand gen and pipeline building. And I joined CarbonCure in 2019, was there for the scaling of the business along with my partner, Sean. And we'll get into more details on that and a lot of these kind of topics as we get into this. And left about a year ago, and now I'm working with lots of climate tech companies in the pre-commercial and commercial stage. And so there's been a lot of learnings that I've carried over from my time at CarbonCure into the world that I'm in today, working as a fractional CMO.
And I'm Sean Zuberbier. Good to be with you today. Hope everyone is doing well. as Lori indicated, we've worked together in the clean tech space at CarbonCure. That was quite a ride. We'll be sharing a little bit about our adventures with you. Prior to CarbonCure, I was 20 years in software and SaaS as well, including about 8 years as CRO with Galvanize prior to its acquisition by Diligent Technology for $1 billion. And I'm happy to be here and lend whatever kind of experience or ideas that I can.
Awesome. And we're so pleased to have both of you here. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I know it takes a lot to scale any business, but tech, and especially clean tech, comes with its own set of challenges. For one, you're often first to market or close enough to be first to market that you're spending about half your battle educating your target market on what your solution is, let alone why they need it and should buy it. And so I kind of wanted to start there. Can you both explain in a bit more detail the story of CarbonCure and what your initial challenges were when you came on board?
Yeah, that's a really good introduction, and that's very true. Any technology, but particularly in climate tech. I think that certainly for me, a couple of the challenges that I highlighted when I came in was that while the team had done some amazing work, the prior team to me joining, I call it, there was a lot of shiny objects. There's lots of places that you can focus in a startup business, but really you need to focus on where the money is. And any sales leader loves to hear that from a marketing from a marketing partner. But there were lots of influencers in the world of CarbonCure and what it would take to actually commercialize the technology. People who cared about low embodied carbon, like engineers and architects and contractors, and a lot of the work had been done to build that story and that narrative. It helps raise money. It's the big picture stuff. It's the climate story. It's important, it's compelling, but it actually wasn't where the revenue was going to come from. The revenue was going to come from a totally different audience, which was ready mix producers. And inherent in that is the second challenge. So one is about focusing on where the money is and who's actually buying the technology. And two, then it's around reorienting and aligning your message around what matters to those customers. So in the early stages of CarbonCure's growth and the audiences that they were appealing to, they were very interested in climate, and that mattered greatly. What matters to the ready mix producer, those who actually pay for the technology, are things that are very different, things like the economic value proposition. And so my challenge coming on board was to reorient the ship, focus on a new customer base and a new audience, and rebuild a totally different message and a go-to-market strategy that was pointing towards a totally different customer. And I think that that's probably not unlike it's actually quite similar to what I'm seeing in a lot of the companies that I'm working with today as well.
And did you find that you came across a lot of hurdles from either your colleagues or people, your CEO, essentially, when trying to reframe that message? And how do you kind of combat that and reorient that ship?
I actually did not. I would say, and that's actually a real testament to the CEO that we worked with and leadership. They were very open to reframing the discussions. And the reason why was it was we had to do something different, right? We had to scale the business. When Sean and I came on board, we were sort of at a 50 customer sort of threshold, and everyone agreed. And this is one thing that Sean always talks about, is like the number one priority is revenue. And when you start to talk about the things that drive revenue, and you talk about this very practically and pragmatically, everyone understood that we had to change our language and our tactics to go after where the revenue was going to come from. So I didn't get pushback on that, predominantly because we showed results. And as you start to show results and business is coming through the door, people are more understanding and trusting of that process. And we didn't give up the other work that had been done. We didn't give up the climate message. We didn't give up the AEC community. We just proportioned it in a way that mattered to how we only had limited resources. You can't do everything. And so if you look at everything through the lens of, is this furthering our goal of revenue? Is this furthering our climate mandate of reducing the carbon footprint of concrete by 500 megatons? If those answers are no, then it really allows you a lens to walk away from things. Sean?
What I would add to that is, as we transition from being knowledge leader, revenue generator, and a variety of other roles within the industry, and focused much more exclusively on, we're just trying to build a business, generating a client list, generate successful customers, and something that's repeatable. We zeroed in on, as Lori indicated, what is the total addressable market? We have to measure it. We have to understand, is it actually a viable business or is it a project? Because some of the products that were coming down the pipeline at CarbonCure weren't actually addressing viable businesses. They were projects. They were potentially a handful of potential customers, but nothing that you could build a real business around. And so we zeroed in on, if ready mix was the target market for CarbonCure in North America, and then eventually in other markets around the world, how many are there? How many plants are there? And then within the market, every market is stratified. Not all companies are the same. So we had to develop our own ideal customer profile. What does that client actually look like? They are typically the easiest to sell. How many are there, and how do we sell those people? It's been my experience that if you're going to scale anything, what you're doing has to be simple and repeatable. It can't be rocket science. It has to be simple and repeatable so many other people can be involved in your process. And if you figure out what that secret sauce is, you'll have something that will build and grow much more easily than if you're trying to invent a wheel every time you go out on the field.
And it seems like a part of that secret sauce was hiring the two of you. So this is a great segue to talk about a bit about hiring practices. I've been in situations where people generally seem to think that marketing and sales have to have a natural friction. There's this friendly competition. But speaking to both of you, you both turned that on its head. So I'd like to dive into that a little bit and just learn more about your working relationship, as well as how our listeners today can kind of find those right people for the right job going forward.
I'll start by saying that, oh, sorry. See, I did it. Sean was going to speak and I spoke. Did you want to go?
Sure. So yeah, I agree, Samantha. There has been, I guess, a perspective that marketing and sales have a bit of a love-hate relationship, and I don't subscribe to that. I think if that characterizes a relationship that maybe people have seen in the past, it might be actually just a reflection of either inconsistent goals or immaturity between the players involved. I think the folks, if you've got a sales and a marketing leader and they're both aligned with the CEO and they're focused on growing a business, building a business, satisfactorily addressing a market opportunity, giving people and creating good paying jobs and having a positive impact, then you're going to be above the line. And above and beyond, politics and squabbling and things like that. And Lori and I have always approached building a business from a similar point of view. We see beyond that, and I don't think it's because we're special. It's just because we actually care about building something substantial, and we recognize that we rely on each other. Doesn't mean we shy away from tough conversations. We've had a few, but it means that we always have each other's back. And it means that I know when I'm in a difficult spot, Lori's there for me and she can rely on me in the same way.
And yeah, I echo everything Sean said, and that is not it's not the norm. And I definitely felt that was a big part of the speed of scale that we saw at CarbonCure because we worked lockstep together. A couple of things on this. One is, and I see this a lot, is hiring from within your own industry. Well, climate tech doesn't have a large track record of people, right? There's not a lot of commercially successful companies. And so one of the things that CarbonCure did that I think is extremely important for people to think about is to hire people that have actually scaled technologies before. Everyone thinks their industry is unique. And yes, there are unique nuances to every industry, language, customers, whatever, but scaling technology is scaling technology. And if you can find people who've done that, it doesn't have to be within your own industry. Sean and I knew nothing about concrete 4 years ago, and I call myself a concrete geek a little bit right now, right? Because I learned enough to be valuable in the industry and to actually really love what I do. So I think that where you hire from and the type of people you hire and the experience really does not have to be unique to your industry. And I will also say that a couple of things. One is, it does start with leadership. And if we both represent this unified front and we work together and have each other around that, then the rest of the team follows suit. And that was a huge part of the team's satisfaction around their roles. There wasn't that conflict, but it also was a big part of the success because each one of the marketing team had a sales leader that they were aligned with, and they worked together mutually to drive success for the business. And it was extremely rewarding. And I do think that it was an integral part of why we scaled as quickly as we did. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just reading some questions coming in through Q&A in the chat. So I'll start with a question from James. How do you go about finding who owns the problem and has the wallet to pay for the solution? So often there's so much arm waving that the industry or company owns it, but identifying the actual individual who's going to buy it and has the wallet. And how do you find out who that is when addressing your market?
Sean, you want to take that one?
That's a great question. What I would say to that is my experience in sales has led me to a place of simplicity. Customers are interested in what I have to sell if it either A, increases my revenue, or B, reduces my costs in one way or another. If you can orient your value proposition to one of those two angles, then the person who will be interested in your technology and ultimately signing off on it is going to be a budget holder. And depending on the size of your business, who is the target, it could be the owner of the business, or it could be a financial officer, or it could be a business line leader. But the essence of it is whoever controls a budget and is interested either in managing costs there or controls revenue and is interested in growing them, they will be individuals that sign off on an acquisition of your technology, and it won't be a technical officer. A technical officer will help to validate that whatever you are offering plays nice with existing in-house technologies and other procedures that are in place. But a technical officer won't have the authority to actually make a purchase. The purchaser is going to be someone who controls budget or controls revenue.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question is, so you found your market, you addressed it, you obviously honed in, created a repeatable process, but as CarbonCure grew, how did you know when it was time to evolve your positioning, time to kind of widen your scope for a target market? Because I find that clean tech companies always tend to jump in to find that hero almost a little bit too soon. And so how did you know when it was time to scale?
What I would suggest, and I'll start it off, Lori, and you can add in your perspective as well. When we joined CarbonCure, and it's not a negative observation in any way. I think it's just the reality that many emerging clean tech companies find themselves in. They were trying to sell everybody, and they were in particular attracted to the really large, appealing targets, those accounts which could drive, potentially millions of dollars of revenue a year. Why not, right? But that's like trying to start selling the hardest accounts that you could ever sell. Why start there? I'm a big believer in just making it as easy as possible. Any company that's already commercialized, who's already made sales, will find that there are examples of the ideal customer already within their client base. They're not all the same, but some of them are representative of the exact kind of company that's going to have a lower threshold to get over to convince them to actually acquire and invest in your technology. So what we did with CarbonCure was stop this spray and pray. We went back to the actual customer roster. We examined who bought them, who bought the technology. We stratified by size of account and where they were located, et cetera. And we found that there really was a sweet spot with these small and mid-sized ready-mix producers that were spread across multiple states. So we said, those guys they have a shorter cycle of sale, they have great average order value, they're retaining the technology, they're expanding the use of the technology within their organization. That's our ICP, our ideal customer profile. Where are the other ones just like them? And then we began a targeted marketing and sales effort focused exclusively on them. And that started to accelerate our growth because those sales were a whole lot easier than trying to sell the really large accounts or selling government. Lori, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say that, we also sometimes overshot our reach and our focus. One of the things that, and I see this a lot, so I'm speaking not necessarily only about CarbonCure, but what I'm seeing is you start to get these early wins in North America, and all of a sudden the world is your oyster. And let's plant a flag in this country because we got a request from somebody here. And let's plant a flag in this country because we got a request here. And while it's really hard to turn down those early requests for your solution in all these new countries, it is also very risky because when we go back to focus and knowing when to scale, sometimes you can scale too wide and too fast. And there are implications when you start to sell one unit or one technology into a country, and then you think, oh, there's opportunities here. Let's build here, and then let's build here. And what happens, a couple of things, is you take your eye off the prize because you're not now focused where the real core business is. You've gone from a sprint to a marathon, and you haven't walked before you run. And also there are implications every time you go into a new country. Language, resources, on-site, culture, whatever it is. And so it is extremely important to double down on where your wins are and your opportunities are today, and try not to scale too fast and too wide, because it does risk backfiring in many ways.
And it can be hard, especially in those early days too, when you're first starting to land customers. It's so easy to have scope creep or project creep and all of that. So what are some of the warning signs that you have noticed if you are taking your eye off the prize?
What are the warning signs?
Yeah, it can be easy to get in, I think, a little bit too deep too quickly with wanting to scale.
Well, typically you'll have internal dialogues to establish, okay, this is what our focused area is going to be. And then if 5 minutes goes by and somebody brings an exception to the table, then that's a warning sign. It's really hard to maintain discipline on the focus of the business when some sales guy comes around to the table and says, I know this is an exception, but this is such a sweet account and it's going to be big in the state of Texas for us. Or someone says, I know a guy in Japan and he da 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 da. It's like, who wouldn't want to have Japan as a target market, right? But it does take discipline, and I think that's sometimes where the hard conversations come in, because you gotta go back to, why did we take this initial position? Why did we make the decision to focus on these particular markets, geographic areas, or whatever? What was the timeline that we established, and what was our agreement to accept exceptions to this model? If you succumb to exceptions 5 minutes after establishing agreement, you already know you're going to be right back in the same challenging situation you were at the beginning. So sometimes you just got to knuckle down and say no.
That's very much it, right? And a couple of things. Having clear-cut OKRs or agreement and revisiting these on a regular basis, because then you have a lens by which you can say, no, this falls outside of those deliverables or those priorities that we agreed upon. That's really important. And as a leadership team, you need to hold each other accountable to that, which means tough conversations. When I joined CarbonCure, and I was accused of this, but I take it, wear it with a badge of honor, I said no more than I said yes. And it was actually a bit of a refreshing approach for a lot of people, because people get caught up in this cycle of just chasing tails and trying to, just do busy work, right? Just doing lots of stuff. And you do need to focus. And that is where you can see scope creep comes in, because it's outside of the things you've agreed on. It no longer actually serves the goals that you had agreed you were going to be going after. And that's where things fall off the rails. So I do think it's really important to hold the leadership team has to hold each other accountable for those discussions and that focus. And we also need to support our teams who then don't have that same voice to say no. And you need to be that voice on their behalf. We really need to be aligned on those priorities as a team.
Agreed. And honestly, when the teams mesh and you are working towards that one target, it is magic. I've been a part of a tech company that scaled, and everything you do, you just feel like it's amazing. It's a great feeling. I'm going to jump back into the Q&A because we had a few come through. So I feel like these might go back a little bit, but this one's from Logan. So when Sean and Lori identified their channels to their target markets, how might they recommend ways to bootstrap their outreach or marketing to those people or decision makers? And what other recommendations in regards to reaching those markets do you have? Would it be equity investment towards marketing efforts?
So obviously I have a predisposition on bootstrapping marketing. I think that marketing is like the last people think of spending money on. And as somebody who sort of always sits in the cost center, I think I will say that it's finding a balance. Obviously, there's not infinite pools of money to invest, but you have to see marketing as a strategic investment in driving the business. You can't see marketing as a support engine or somebody who does design or figures out, works on the brand. One of the things that I appreciated when I came on board was that there was a commitment, dollars and cents and verbally, that marketing was going to be a strategic accelerant to the business. And you invest in salespeople and you don't think twice about those dollars spent. You have to think about marketing the same way. So I caution about when we talk about bootstrapping marketing. I get that there is a limited pool, but I also think it's important to think about the role that marketing can play in your growth. Just having a bunch of people selling and cold calling is not an efficient spend of your sales resources either. And so you can make those investments a lot more to pay off better. And I would just say then, again, what I did in the early days of CarbonCure is the early people that I hired and the focus on the work was all about proving the model. So when in year one, when we were filling the pipeline and the sales team was closing, nobody questioned that investment in year two because we proved the contribution to the business. You have to be patient in that process because it's not a quick fix. But I think those are kind of my views on the investment in marketing and just making sure that you're focusing your early investment on things that are going to fill the pipeline.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The year before Lori and I joined, CarbonCure had 3 salespeople that were doing their best to spread the message around markets in North America. And they contracted, I believe it was 45 locations to take on the technology. And in the first year that Lori and I were there, those 3 same salespeople, properly supported by the marketing and demand gen programs that Lori's alluding to, they closed 135 locations. So same 3 people, properly supported, way bigger ROI on what CarbonCure was paying them. So what we found there was stopping, pausing, doing your homework to do the proper setup meant that the efficiency and the productivity of the people on the front line went up significantly.
You said proving the model. Marketing is a pretty vast spectrum. So like what channels did you focus on? What was your distribution? What kind of campaigns or collateral did you create? I'd be more curious to hear about that as well.
So I often hear people say like, it's never about just one channel to market. It's like an integrated story. So where you have to start with is like, you could have the best story. And if you're not in the right place in front of the right people with that message, it falls flat. Or if you are in all these channels and spending all this money on advertising and going to these trade shows and you don't have the right message, then it also falls flat. So it's actually about those 2 things coming together, and it goes back to the basics. So like really honing in on your ICP and really being clear about what your value proposition is. That's basics. Once you get that right, then you have to figure out how to get that in front of the customers and where they're buying and where they're seeing. So it is a combination of things. It was, and we people always used to say to us, we hit above our fighting weight because we were everywhere. People always knew who we were, but we weren't spending huge amounts of money. We were just really smart about where we were. So every quarter, one very key leadership webinar with a customer. It was never about us talking about our stuff. It was about our customers talking about the value it delivered. That one webinar drove one large asset, like an ebook, which then got parsed off into multiple blog posts, which then contributed to like editorials that we wrote in 2 or 3 key publications where ready-mix producers were making decisions. And then our social media followed the exact same theme and content. What I see a lot of people doing is a lot of stuff, and it's not integrated. And so you could map then a cycle of a campaign from the start of a webinar through to all of the materials that got produced. One investment in one campaign drove multiple outputs. Those outputs then were featured in all of the key areas that our producers or our prospects were looking for content. And we did that on a regular basis. We owned 2 or 3 key storylines, very economically driven, by the way, not climate driven, but very economically driven. And we continued to do that. Now, there were other things we did as we scaled bigger. We did direct mail campaigns, but it was not, I'll tell you one thing, it was not showing up at a bunch of trade shows and throwing swag at them. Like, it wasn't about that. It was about the content, the targeting of the audience. And the other thing that we did is we were very clear on which accounts we were going after. So we had an account-based marketing approach, and unless those accounts or those leads came from those names, unless the partners the other thing we did is we partnered with the ready-mix associations. So we may have not had huge inroads into the ready-mix community, but the ready-mix associations did. So we partnered with them, and they did a ton of marketing on our behalf. And that voice from the associations to the ready mixers was extremely influential. It wasn't high cost, but it was extremely high quality.
And the messaging was consistent. So across all these different places and channels, if you will, the messaging was consistent, and it was always led by internal education. So the salespeople, the customer operations people, the technical services people were always educated by marketing on the next leg of the campaign and what was coming shortly thereafter, and the messaging, etc. And that enabled everyone to be speaking the same language. So if a prospect then interacted with something online or through a blog post or at a trade show, the messaging then was reinforced when they had a conversation with a salesperson or a technical services person. And so it looked like CarbonCure knew what they were talking about. And it made for a very compelling way to interact with a prospect because it gave us credibility.
Absolutely. And there's no disruption from what they're seeing externally to what they're hearing internally as well in the story narrative. Okay. This one is from Graham, and Sean, directed at you. Can you expand your comments to have the selling company define, this is the problem we can solve for you with our shiny thing? I think this is going back to your target market and selling, I guess, to the smaller ready mixes versus the hero, I believe. But Graham, forgive me if I have misread that. This did come in 14 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, so I'll add a little bit to that. Hopefully this is useful. What we found, it was educational for me, being in a market that was new. And I think about the product adoption life cycle. Not only are not all accounts created equal in I guess in the eyes of the vendor, you're looking for that ideal customer profile, that ICP that Lori referenced. But when you're introducing a new product to market, there's going to be there's a certain kind of DNA on the buying side that's going to be interested in doing business with you. If it's a new product to the market, it's going to be an innovator who's willing and interested in taking a chance on you. It's not going to be someone who is more traditional, more conservative, more focused on the dollars and cents of running their business because, frankly, their profit margins are single digit and they just don't have any business or mind share to be focused on anything else. So we needed to find that DNA amongst the target market that we had identified. Who are those accounts, those companies that were demonstrating, because of their own actions in the marketplace, that they were innovative, that they were looking to be recognized as leaders amongst their peers? Those are the kinds of accounts that were much more interested in what we had to say. That resulted in sales cycles that were quicker, and frankly, us doing business with companies that were willing to take a risk on CarbonCure at the time, because CarbonCure was quite small. So finding those firms it's not easy. You got to do your homework. It takes a lot of phone calls, a lot of research in the marketplace, but every market has them. you can find the innovators. They're also going to be the ones that will be willing to speak on your behalf when things go well. You properly support those, they will become your speakers on your next webinar. They'll be joining you at the trade show and introduce themselves to other prospects who might be interested to take a look at your technology. But that's part of the sauce that we found was really important to our success. Finding those companies who were innovative, wanted to be viewed as leaders in the space, and therefore were interested in an emerging technology like CarbonCure's.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then just on that as well, so where did the partnership with the Ready Mix Association come in? Was that at the beginning of kind of identifying this market? How far along in that journey? And maybe what were some of the details of that partnership?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, in every industry that I've worked in, selling technology, no one ever really wants to hear a vendor sell their stuff, right? No one wants a product pitch. They want to learn how a solution can solve a problem that they're dealing with. And they certainly want to hear it from neutral third parties very often, or thought leaders in the space, whether it's a customer that looks like them in their own business or people that they learn from as part of their industry. It's no different. The Ready Mix Association was a conduit to ready mix producers. We were a tech company in climate. We didn't really have relationships with the ready mix community per se, but the associations do, and their mandates in this scenario and in many of these scenarios are to educate and provide value to their members. And one of the ways they educate and provide value is through content and events and webinars and lunch and learns and things like that. And for what it's worth, it's a revenue opportunity for these associations as well. We spend money on marketing. There's an upside for them, and they also will then be a conduit for sharing our information and promoting our events or co-sponsoring events with us. And it goes a long way for every industry when your associations are providing educational content for you, not product pitches, educational content that is valuable to you. And in our scenario, we were educating a market on sustainability and embodied carbon. And I can tell you that was not on their radar. It was not part of their language. It was not part of their knowledge base. And so anything we could do along with the associations to further the education on what was happening around regulations and what was happening around policy and how they could implement these changes in their organizations was actually seen as value add and a very, very valuable way for us to get our messaging and our marketing in front of the customers we wanted to reach.
Awesome. And then I've got one more question in the chat about the ideal customer profile. And this sort of an anonymous attendee, it says, how did you convince the leadership team to shut down some of the smaller projects that didn't fit? I found this difficult when the leadership team has a technical background.
Well, money talks, right? Honestly, money talks. And I'll say a couple of things on this because I think it was, first of all, the alignment of Sean and I on this narrative is key. If we are not on the same page on this stuff, it's harder. So this is where that alignment is really important. And we both care about where the money's coming from. And we can very easily connect the dots that those small projects are not actually going to drive revenue. And so for me, it always kept coming back to that. And it was about our mission. So we had a mission to, this is the corporate brand. This is where other people cared about things that were outside of the revenue. But that was about, driving 500 megatons of carbon reductions in concrete. Those small little projects are distractions. They are not tied to the big mission. So you either tie it back to things that matter to you and to everybody, which is revenue, or you tie it back to your big mission. And if those small projects are not, and they're likely 99% of the time not going to have any major impact, then they are just make work projects. And I just like to use logic and pragmatism on all of these things. And when I talk through logic and pragmatism, even technology people, much to their chagrin, have to kind of come along with that because you can't argue a lot of those facts. And then they're just, and it's easier to come at it from that perspective.
That's why it's so important to understand your total addressable market. And it's also important to understand where you are in the product adoption lifecycle. Because when Lori and I encountered that situation at CarbonCure, and there was this internal, because it's been going on for a while, this internal point of view, we got this thing, we're going to bring it to market, it's going to be great. It's totally different. Nobody does this. And we counted up the number of companies that might potentially buy it. It was like really small. And then you got to realize the fact that, okay, think about product adoption lifecycle. Half of those companies are going to be late adopters or laggards. So cut it in half. And then of the other half, you're only going to get 10, 15, 20% in the initial 2, 3, 4 years. So what does that number look like? And then how much you actually expect to get per customer? Do that math. And I guarantee you, if that doesn't convince a CEO to change his point of view, the CFO will take him alongside and say, this isn't a good idea to spend our money on. We need to really conserve and focus on things that can drive ROI.
And this is actually a lovely segue to a question in the chat, and more on the consulting side. Please share your experiences, both messy and cleaner, in coaching founders to think and then behave commercially instead of in their comfortable areas of expertise.
I guess I'll start there. That's a really good question. I think what's important there, I guess there's a couple things that are important there. One is the relationship you have with the founder. What kind of relationship do you have? Can you have candid conversations? Yes or no? If you can't have candid conversations with a founder, and you're someone who should be able to have a candid conversation with that individual, and frankly, why shouldn't anybody be able to do that? Then that would be a flag in my book. The second is, if you feel that direction should be changed, or you should influence direction to go in a different way, make sure your house is in order. Make sure you've done the math. Make sure you have an airtight argument, and make sure you've sounded it internally with people that you do trust. Because once you run it up the flagpole and try to convince a CEO to go in a direction he or she doesn't want to go, or perhaps hadn't considered, they're going to expect that you know what you're talking about. So make sure you've done your homework. If you have, and you have the ability to have a good, candid conversation with that senior leader, then go and have it. And what you might also do, just kind of piggybacking off that point number 2, is bring a friend. Make sure you've tested this theory internally with someone else who you trust is influential, and bring a friend along to the conversation.
I'll also, and I echo everything that Sean said, I think that there's a voice and a place for founders. And I think that when I was actually really lucky to work in a company called Seagate Software, which ultimately became Crystal Decisions and Business Objects and SAP. And it was one of the largest tech successes in Vancouver. And the CEO joined, when I had joined, his philosophy was hire the smartest people and get out of their way. And I think that there's a place for everybody in an organization to prosper, and you need to know where your lane is. And what I've found for sure at CarbonCure is our CEO was founder, and he had skills and value to add in a part of the equation that was different than the commercialization part of the business, to be candid. And that's what Sean and I were there to do. We were running the commercialization part of the business. He was raising money. He was doing brand. He had a voice that was different and important and valuable than the voice that we were creating on the commercialization side. There's room for everybody in these organizations. You need to know to choose the lane and not kind of like, again, that's where that conflict is, right? Like, hire the best people, let them do what they do, and you focus on what you do, and be okay with all of that. And being able to have these difficult, hard conversations are absolutely critical to a company's success. And sometimes founders are their own worst enemies and get in the way on this stuff, and it is an impediment to growth and success. And you need to know that as a founder. And if you're not willing to have those conversations, then you get in your own way.
And if the last point on this is, I put my sales hat on, is don't try to close the deal in the first conversation. Sometimes you got to sell it slow. Just plant the seed, nurture it a little bit, water it a little bit, close it later. You don't have to close it on the first call.
That is brilliant at that.
I love garden analogies, so I'm on board. Okay, so I am jumping into our Q&A. We have 14 minutes left, so if you have any remaining questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A now. This one's from Catherine. So clean tech encompasses such a wide variety of products and services, business models, target buyers, and sales cycle lengths. So how do you make sure your product positioning and marketing strategy are optimized for the company's ideal clients, and how do insights from the sales team contribute to that process in your experience?
They go hand in hand. I mean, if we are not aligned with what the sales team is hearing in the marketplace and not feeding that back into our messaging, it is falling on deaf ears. When I start the messaging process, it is a very extensive input process from multiple stakeholders across the business. Obviously, frontline is the most important, and customers, by the way, because even frontline are not in the heads of customers. And so, and that needs to be occurring on a quarterly basis. So you start with a core messaging framework that had input across teams with some level of buy-in and agreement. You're never going to have, everybody's got an opinion on what word you use and what language you use and whatnot, but you get to a place where 80% is like good enough, and then you go, and then you adapt as you're having conversations, especially as an early stage company. You're hypothesizing a lot of stuff. You've taken early input from early adopters, by the way, who are not necessarily representative of the mass market, and you may learn a lot more as you go along, and you have to be able to pivot. That doesn't mean changing your messaging every 5 minutes. And it doesn't mean like turning on a dime because one customer said something and all of a sudden you have a new strategy and a new message. It does mean being measured and thoughtful in the process. And that is why that sales and marketing alignment and working together is so key, because every quarter we would be pulsing the sales team. What are the key topics you're hearing from customers? What's hot in the market today? What are you hearing? What should we be focusing our content on? We didn't make that up in our ivory tower. That was coming directly from sales teams who were talking to customers, who knew what were the core, topics and messages that were going to resonate.
The one thing I would add to that is, I just think about the economic model. When you're thinking about sales and marketing investment to build a client base and to drive growth, you always have to keep in mind, what is the revenue stream you're expecting from the target account over the lifetime of doing business with you? What are the costs that you're incurring to acquire that customer up front? And what are the ongoing costs that you're expecting to incur over time to keep them successful? At the end of the day, it all has to balance out, and not just balance out. At the end of the day, you got to make money off of it. So you need to be thoughtful about the investments that you're planning to undertake, and make sure that the revenue that comes in on the other side is appropriate for those investments.
And this kind of comes into the concept of being product-led versus sales-led as well. So would you say that CarbonCure was very much a sales-led company? And was that because of your work? Was it product-led when you first started? Like, how did that transition happen and how did that come about?
It was product-led, as I would have expected it to be when Lori and I joined. But the reason we joined was because the CEO and the board realized that growth wasn't happening as per their expectations. So they had a shift. If we're going to be growth focused, then we do need to start to change our mentality, change our objectives, change our investments, and change our discipline as a business.
I'll give you a really good example of what Sean always used to do, but we would start on these priority lists as an executive team, and like the revenue number was like the last thing we talked about. Like every time we'd sit down and talk, where on the part, like the only thing we should be talking and starting our conversations with as a leadership team should always be about, where's our revenue? What are our sales targets? What are the inputs going into what's going to make our numbers? What's our discipline around our Salesforce hygiene and our CRM and all of that stuff? I think you have to switch the narrative. Everyone's very attached to their products, particularly particularly founders of technology, and the product will only take you so far. Again, build it and they will come. You can have the best product on the market, but if actually nobody knows about it, then it doesn't really matter how great it is. And by the way, you can also have a mediocre product, but if you have great sales and marketing, it doesn't really matter either. So I think it's like really important to understand that you have to pivot at some point in time from being product led to being sales led. And that is a totally different mindset.
In terms of enabling your sales and marketing team, one of our questions in the chat is, what are some of the education and ongoing training you provided your team to ensure that they were always performing their best and had the skills and knowledge they needed?
Sean, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we invested in sales training every year. It was important that we were operating in a consistent way across the sales force. If you have individual salespeople managing a sales cycle, managing a pipeline, and sort of providing a forecast up to you or up to managers in an inconsistent way, at my level, I'll have no reliable way to make a call. People have to operate in a similar way, prosecute the business in a similar fashion, so that a mid-stage deal is commonly acknowledged as a mid-stage deal with a certain probability to close and an expectation on timelines, etc. So training and updating the training on sales methodology was something that we would do regularly. Technical training, of course, was something that we would do on a regular basis. But what we did most often, and it was at least monthly, if not more regularly, was conversations with marketing about messaging and about sales and marketing tactics together, regional approaches that were different from East Coast to Midwest to West Coast, etc. That was the kind of enablement that happened on a near continuous basis. But if we weren't investing in our people thoughtfully and proactively, we weren't going to get the most out of them.
Awesome. All right. I think I have time for one or two more questions. So I'll answer this one from the Q&A. So not with understanding your business model, at what point did you evolve to start pursuing those more strategic accounts to create barriers to entry or mimic versus only those quick sales cycle accounts and low hanging fruit?
That's a great question. I'll start and then Lori, please add in. I think when we transitioned back to targeting those marquee level accounts, it was when we were confident that we wouldn't blow up the business if we had lost it. So you have to, if you go after them and you win them, you cannot lose them. You don't want to lose a marquee account because number one, you'll never get it back. But number two, all the other guys will hear about it. So make sure that you can sustain the loss of it. So you need to have the track record to get their attention. That's not that hard to do. What's harder is the marquee accounts are also the highest maintenance accounts that you'll ever have. And they will expect to be the number one priority for you at the expense of all other clients. So you need to make sure that your technical and operational house is completely in order and that you have the chops to quickly and effectively handle the inevitable technical hiccups that happen. And they will have a higher standard of service expected from you. You have to be able to deliver on it. And they will also expect that they will get the best price from you so that the revenue per unit or however you want to measure it will be the lowest relative to other accounts, most other accounts that you sell. So it really is a double-edged sword. You'll get the badge and that's great, but you can't afford to lose it. And the revenue or the profit that you drive from that account will be modest relative to others. But it's a pursuit worth taking because of the stature and the prestige that it can bring to your business when you're at a place to properly and successfully support a marquee badge.
I guess the only other thing I'll say about that is those strategic accounts were also the ones that had huge resale potential. So Sean's strategy, the wholesale strategy, was around land and expand. Those marquee accounts were also those strategic accounts that had multiple resale opportunities. So maybe the cost of acquisition on the first one was high, but there was the cost to repeat those sales across multiple locations was huge. So I actually think we very quickly pivoted to strategic accounts by focusing on the ICP that was the right ICP. It just so happened to also have the marquee label. There were no quick wins on any of these deals. We may have said that those were quick value, quick wins. There were no quick wins. What they were highest probability of converting. That's really different than a quick win. These were tough sales cycles for very many reasons, which we don't have to get into right now. but they were strategically thought through. And so that investment was absolutely worth it, because one plant led to 50 expansion plants over the course of, a window of time, sometimes more.
Well said, both of you. Thank you so much for your time today. We are almost at the end of our webinar, so I want to end with the question that I always like to end on is, what is the most important thing to take away from today's session?
One thing, it's always very hard to say one thing. I for me, it is, I'll say two things. One is focus. In this discussion, it is paramount to success, and I'm seeing it so often right now in the world that I'm in right now. And I'll always say the word, I am probably the biggest straight talker you're ever going to meet. If you are not having candid, honest discussions about the business, and you're not creating an environment for that, it will be a huge barrier to success. Aside from the alignment that Sean and I had, those are the things that I think are very key for startups, scale ups, to scale their business.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, if you're serious about scaling your business, call Lori.
I didn't pay you to say that. Thank you, Sean.
We will be posting her phone number, direct phone number, in the email after the session. Thank you both, Sean and Lori, for your time today. Again, I loved this conversation. I think you provided a lot of value and really tangible insights for ventures at any stage to walk away with today. So we really appreciate it. And if there are any final questions, you can just send them to the email that you get this recording from, and we can triage them accordingly. Have a lovely day, afternoon, wherever you may be across the country, and we will see you at the next session, which is up on the screen. It is in November. It is our next Fireside Chat on ESG, Impact, B Corp. What is the difference? And with that, I will leave you to the rest of your day. Happy scaling.
Thanks, Samantha.
Bye now.